The morning began like many others in that quiet neighborhood. The sun rose gently, spreading a soft light through thin curtains and across simple furniture that had been in the same place for years. Birds made small sounds outside, and somewhere down the street, a motorbike passed, its noise fading quickly. Inside the house, the family moved slowly, still half asleep, following routines they had followed hundreds of times before. Nothing felt unusual. Nothing felt wrong. The child woke up before anyone else, as usual. Small feet touched the cool floor, and there was a moment of stillness, the kind that exists only early in the morning. The child stood there, rubbing sleepy eyes, feeling that light heaviness in the body that comes after deep sleep. There was a slight discomfort in the stomach, but it did not feel serious. Children feel small aches all the time. It was easy to ignore. The kitchen smelled faintly of yesterday's food and fresh air coming in through a half-open window. A parent soon entered, hair not fully combed, eyes still tired, but with a gentle smile, ready for the day. Breakfast was simple. Bread, warm tea. A few words exchanged, nothing meaningful, just normal talk about school, weather, and plans for later. The child ate slowly, quieter than usual, but no one noticed. Quiet days happened too. As the minutes passed, the child complained once, softly, about feeling tired. The parent touched the child's forehead. It felt normal. Not too warm, not too cold. There was no reason to worry. The child had stayed up late the night before, watching something on a phone. That was likely the reason. The parent reminded the child to drink some water and finish breakfast. Outside, life moved on without pause. Neighbors swept their doorsteps. Shopkeepers lifted metal shutters. School children walked in groups, laughing loudly, pushing one another, carrying heavy bags that bounced on their backs. The world showed no sign that something fragile was about to break. The child got dressed slowly. The uniform felt tighter than usual, though nothing had changed. Buttons were fastened with care, shoes tied carefully. There was a brief moment when the child paused, standing still, holding the edge of a chair, breathing slightly heavier than normal. It passed quickly. Children often stop like that. It meant nothing. On the way out, the child looked back at the house. Not in fear, not in sadness, just a normal glance. The parent locked the door, unaware that this simple action would later return in memory again and again. Painful in its normality, the walk to school was short. The sun was now higher, warming the air. The child walked beside the parent, sometimes dragging feet, sometimes speeding up. At one point, the child asked to be carried for a few seconds, saying the legs felt weak. The parent laughed gently and agreed, lifting the child briefly before setting them down again. It felt playful, not serious. At the school gate, the child waved and joined classmates. The parent watched for a moment, making sure the child entered safely. The child turned once more and smiled. That smile would later become unbearable to remember. Inside the classroom, the day started as usual. Desks scraped the floor. Teachers called out instructions. Children whispered, shared pencils, and passed notes. The child sat quietly, staring at the board, feeling strange. There was a dull pain now, deeper than before, hard to explain. The child raised a hand once, asking to go to the bathroom. The teacher nodded without concern. In the bathroom, the child leaned against the wall, feeling dizzy. The room felt too bright. Sounds echoed. The child splashed water on the face and waited until the feeling passed. It did pass slowly. The child returned to class, embarrassed, not wanting attention. Children learn early not to cause trouble. By mid-morning, the child no longer felt normal. Breathing felt harder. The stomach hurt more. The teacher noticed the pale face and asked if everything was okay. The child nodded. Saying no felt harder than staying quiet. Children trust adults to notice when something is wrong. When the lunch break came, the child could not eat much. Friends joked about it, offering food, laughing. The child smiled weakly. The body felt heavy, like it was sinking into the chair. The world felt slower, slightly blurred. A call was finally made to the parent. The school said the child did not seem well and should be taken home. The parent arrived quickly, concern growing but still controlled. Children get sick at school all the time. Fevers, stomach bugs, nothing serious usually. On the way home, the child leaned against the parent, eyes half closed. The parent felt the forehead again. It felt warmer now, but still not alarming. At home, the child was laid down on the bed, covered with a light blanket. Water was offered. Medicine for pain was given, the kind kept in almost every home, used many times before. The child slept for a while. The parent watched closely, listening to every breath, noticing small changes, but telling themselves not to panic. Panic helps no one. The child had always recovered before. Always. When the child woke up, things were worse. The pain was sharper. Breathing was fast and shallow. The child whispered that something felt very wrong. That whisper cut through the parent's calm. Fear entered the room quietly but firmly. A decision was made to go to the hospital. Not later. Not after waiting. Now, shoes were put on quickly. A bag was grabbed, without knowing what was needed. The door was locked again. This time, hands shook. The hospital was not far. Traffic felt heavier than usual. Every red light felt like an enemy. The child moaned softly in the seat, eyes closed, face pale and damp with sweat. The parent spoke reassuring words, though fear was now fully awake inside. At the hospital entrance, sounds collided. Phones ringing. People talking. Stretchers moving. The smell of medicine filled the air. The child was carried inside and placed on a chair. A nurse asked questions quickly. Age. Symptoms. Time. The parent answered as best as possible, trying to stay calm, trying to be clear. The child was taken inside for examination. The parent was told to wait. Sitting in that waiting area felt unreal. Time slowed. The parent stared at the floor, listening to footsteps, coughing, distant voices. Every sound felt too loud. Every second felt too long. Inside the examination room, doctors checked the child. Blood pressure, temperature, breathing. They spoke to one another quietly. They asked the child questions. The child answered weakly. Tests were ordered, but there was no sense of urgency yet. The symptoms were still unclear. Many conditions start this way. After some time, the doctor came out to speak with the parent. The words were calm, reassuring. It might be an infection, possibly dehydration. The child would be observed. Medicine would be given. Nothing sounded serious enough to panic. The parent nodded, trusting the words, wanting to believe them. Doctors know best. Hospitals exist to make things better. The child was moved to a small bed. Fluids were started. The lights above were bright. The child looked smaller there, surrounded by machines and tubes. The parent sat beside the bed, holding a small hand, whispering comfort. For a short time, things seemed stable. The child rested. Breathing slowed slightly. The parent allowed a small piece of hope to rise. Maybe this scare would pass like all the others. But beneath the calm surface, something unseen was already moving, growing, unnoticed. The medical case that would later shock everyone had already begun, quietly, without warning, in a body far too young to fight it alone. No one in that room knew it yet. Not the doctors. Not the nurses. Not the parent holding that small hand. The day had started as an ordinary morning. It was already becoming something no one would ever forget. Time inside the hospital felt different. As if it moved according to rules no one fully understood. Minutes stretched longer than they should, and small moments felt heavy with meaning. The parent remained beside the bed, watching every rise and fall of the child's chest, counting breaths without realizing it. The room was quiet, except for soft beeping sounds and distant footsteps in the hallway. The child opened eyes slowly, looking around with confusion. The bright lights hurt. The ceiling felt too close. A weak voice asked where they were. The parent answered gently, explaining that they were at the hospital and everything would be okay. The words were meant to calm the child. But they were also meant to calm the speaker. A nurse entered the room and checked the monitor. She smiled politely and adjusted the tube carrying fluids into the child's arm. Her movements were practiced and calm. She asked the child how they were feeling. The child said the pain was still there, deep and sharp, like something pressing from the inside. The nurse nodded and wrote something down before leaving. Another hour passed. The child shifted restlessly, unable to find a comfortable position. Breathing sounded harder now, louder. The parent mentioned this to a passing nurse who listened for a moment and said it could be anxiety or pain. Medicine would help soon. There was no sign of panic in her voice. Trust is a powerful thing. In that room, the parent trusted every calm word, every gentle smile. Hospitals are places of safety. People go there to be healed. The thought that something serious could be happening felt impossible. The child's body, however, was telling a different story. Small tremors ran through arms and legs. The skin felt damp and warm. The child whispered that it was hard to breathe. The parent pressed the call button. A doctor arrived, listening carefully this time. He checked the child again, placing a stethoscope against the chest, frowning slightly. Oxygen was added. The mask looked too big on the child's face. The child tried to push it away at first, uncomfortable, but the parent held it gently in place. More tests were ordered. Blood was drawn again. The child winced, but did not cry. The parent praised the bravery, though fear was now spreading like cold through the body. Something was not right. This was no longer a simple illness. The hallway outside filled with movement. A trolley passed quickly. Voices spoke in low tones. The parent tried to catch words but could not. Medical language sounded distant and unclear, like a foreign language spoken too fast. Hours passed in fragments. The child slept, woke, cried softly, slept again. Each time the eyes opened, they looked more tired. The pain medicine helped only a little. Breathing remained fast. The oxygen mask fogged with each breath. At some point, the child asked a question that stopped the parent's heart. The child asked if they were going to die. The parent smiled quickly, almost too quickly, and said no. Of course not. Children say strange things when they are scared. But after saying it, the parent had to turn away, blinking hard. Another doctor joined the first. They spoke quietly near the door, glancing toward the bed. Their faces were serious now. The parent stood, stepping closer, asking what was happening. One doctor explained that they were still trying to understand the cause. Sometimes illnesses hide. Sometimes symptoms don't appear clearly at first. The words were careful. They avoided promises. That absence of reassurance spoke louder than anything else. The child suddenly vomited, choking slightly. Alarms sounded. Nurses rushed in. The bed was adjusted. The parent was gently pushed aside, told to wait near the wall. Watching from that distance felt unbearable. The child looked small and frightened, eyes wide, hands reaching out. After the room settled again, the child was cleaned and repositioned. Breathing sounded worse now, shallow and uneven. The doctors decided to move the child to another area for closer monitoring. The bed was rolled through long hallways filled with unfamiliar faces. The new room was colder, filled with more machines, more wires, more screens. The parent felt overwhelmed, but followed closely, refusing to let go of the child's hand until told to step back. As evening approached, the hospital lights grew harsher. Outside, the sun began to set, but inside, there was no sense of time. The parent had not eaten, had not rested. None of that mattered. A senior doctor arrived. The tone changed. Questions were asked again, from the beginning. When did symptoms start? What did the child eat? Any past illness? Every detail was repeated, searched for meaning. The doctor explained that the child's condition was unstable. There were signs of a serious internal problem. They would do everything possible. The parent nodded, barely hearing the words. Fear had now taken full control. The child drifted in and out of consciousness. When awake, there was confusion. Words came slowly. Sometimes they did not make sense. The parent kept talking softly, reminding the child they were not alone. Monitors beeped faster now. Nurses moved quickly, no longer relaxed. Medicine was adjusted. More oxygen was given. The child's chest rose with effort. Late into the night, the parent stepped outside the room briefly, leaning against the wall, hands shaking. Tears finally came, silent and unstoppable. There was no one to comfort them. Other families passed by carrying their own fears. Returning to the bedside, the parent noticed how still the child had become. The breathing was weaker now. A nurse noticed too and called for help. Doctors rushed in again. Instructions were given sharply. The room filled with urgency. The parent was guided out, told to wait just outside. The door closed. Behind that door, the child fought a battle no one could see. The parent stood frozen, listening to muffled sounds, praying without words. What had started as a normal day had now turned into a nightmare. The medical case was no longer unclear. It was critical. And the night was far from over. The door closed with a soft sound, but to the parent standing outside, it felt loud and final. The hallway seemed longer now, brighter, colder. The chair against the wall felt too small, but the parent sat anyway, hands locked together, eyes fixed on the closed door. Every sound from inside made the heart jump. Every second stretched into something painful. People passed by without stopping. Some looked briefly, then looked away. Nurses walked fast, focused, carrying files and trays. Somewhere a phone rang again and again. Life in the hospital did not pause for one child, no matter how serious things had become. The parent tried to remember the exact moment when everything changed. Was it at school? At home? On the drive to the hospital, the mind replayed the morning again and again, searching for a sign that had been missed. The quiet breakfast, the small complaint of tiredness, the smile at the school gate. Each memory felt sharp now, like it was cutting from the inside. After what felt like hours, though it was likely much less, the door opened slightly. A nurse stepped out and spoke softly. The child was still being treated. The parent could come in, but needed to stay calm. The words were gentle, but the meaning behind them was heavy. Inside, the room felt crowded. More people than before? More machines. The child lay still, eyes closed, chest rising unevenly. Tubes and wires surrounded the small body. The sight was overwhelming. The parent stood frozen for a moment, afraid to move, afraid to speak. A doctor explained that the child's condition had worsened suddenly. The body was struggling to cope. They were doing everything possible to support breathing and circulation. The words were careful, chosen to avoid panic. But panic had already arrived. The parent moved closer, taking the child's hand again. It felt warmer than before, slightly damp. The fingers did not squeeze back this time. The parent whispered softly, saying the child's favorite phrases, reminders of home, of safety. It was unclear whether the child could hear, but stopping felt impossible. Time lost meaning. The clock on the wall moved, but it felt disconnected from reality. The child's breathing changed again, becoming more shallow. The machines responded with sharper sounds. Nurses adjusted settings quickly. At one point, the child opened eyes briefly. The look was distant, confused, almost empty. The parent leaned closer, speaking urgently, trying to pull the child back. The eyes closed again without focus. Doctors exchanged looks. Quiet words passed between them. Decisions were being made quickly now. The parent noticed the change in their movements, the way urgency replaced earlier calm. A sense of dread filled the room. Another procedure was explained. Consent was needed. The parent listened, nodded, signed where told, barely understanding the details. There was no real choice. Everything was about giving the child another chance. The procedure began. The parent was asked to step back again. This time, the distance felt unbearable. Watching from the corner, the parent saw controlled chaos. Everyone knew their role. Every second mattered. The child's body reacted poorly. The machines grew louder. Alarms sounded. Someone called out numbers. Another person responded quickly. The parent covered their mouth, tears streaming freely now, no longer hidden. Suddenly the room grew very still. The alarm stopped. For a moment, there was silence that felt unnatural. Then voices started again, quieter but more urgent. The parent was guided out once more. This time, no reassurance was offered. Only a gentle hand on the shoulder, guiding toward the hallway. Outside, the parent slid down the wall onto the floor. Strength left the body completely. The world narrowed to that closed door and the sounds behind it. Thoughts turned into prayers, even if the parent had not prayed in years. Words were whispered without sound. Minutes passed, and more. The hallway clock continued its steady movement, cruel in its normality. Other families walked by, some laughing, some crying. None of them knew what was happening behind that door. Finally, the door opened again. 2 doctors stepped out together. Their faces were serious, tired. One of them spoke slowly, carefully, as if each word weighed too much. They explained that the child's body had gone into severe failure. The condition had progressed faster than expected. Despite all efforts, the situation was extremely critical. They would continue trying, but the next hours were uncertain. The parent nodded, tears falling freely. There was nothing left to ask. Nothing left to argue. Only waiting remained. Back inside, the child lay motionless. Breathing was now fully supported by machines. The face looked peaceful in a way that felt wrong. The parent sat close, holding the small hand, feeling how light it was. Memories flooded in without warning. The first steps. The first day of school. Laughter filling the house. All of it felt painfully alive in contrast to the stillness in front of them. The parent spoke continuously, afraid that silence might mean letting go. Stories were told. Promises were made. Apologies were whispered for things that did not matter anymore. As the night deepened, fewer people moved through the hallway. Lights dimmed slightly. The world outside the hospital slept, unaware. Inside that room, the fight continued. Doctors checked regularly. Machines adjusted automatically. The child did not respond. At one point, the parent felt a strange calm settle in. It frightened them more than fear had. A quiet understanding began to form, unwanted but impossible to ignore. When the doctor returned again, the expression said everything before words were spoken. The parent listened, heart pounding, knowing what was coming. They explained that the child was no longer responding to treatment. The body was shutting down. There was nothing more medicine could do to reverse the process. The parent asked for time. Just a little time. The doctor nodded and stepped back, alone with the child. The parent held the small face gently, brushing hair aside, memorizing every detail. Tears fell onto the blanket. Words of love were spoken again and again, as if repetition could make them stay. The machines continued their steady work, but it felt distant now, like background noise to something far more important. The night pressed on, and with each passing moment, hope grew thinner. Fragile as glass, the medical case that had begun quietly was now revealing its full weight, and everyone involved knew that the next moment could change everything forever. The room felt different now, quieter in a way that pressed down on the chest. The machines were still there, still doing their work, but the urgency that once filled the air had softened into something heavy and slow. The parent sat close to the bed, not moving, afraid that even a small movement might disturb something fragile that was already slipping away. The child lay very still. The face looked calm, almost like sleep, but it was not the kind of sleep that brought rest. The small chest moved only because the machine helped it. Without that steady support, there would be nothing. The parent knew this, even if no one said it out loud. Time continued to move forward, but it no longer felt real. The clock on the wall ticked quietly, each sound landing hard in the silence. The parent watched the second hand go around again and again, wondering how the world could continue when this moment felt like the end of everything. A nurse entered softly, checking lines and screens. Her face showed kindness mixed with sadness. She spoke in a low voice, explaining what she was doing, even though the parent barely heard the words. When she finished, she paused for a moment, placing a gentle hand on the parent's arm before leaving. That small gesture felt heavier than any words. The parent leaned closer to the child, speaking quietly, telling stories that had been told many times before. Stories about small trips, simple joys, silly moments that once filled the house with laughter. Each word felt like a thread trying to hold the child to this world. Memories came without warning. The sound of laughter in the kitchen. The way the child ran through the house, careless and full of energy. The arguments over bedtime. The hugs given without reason. All of it felt unbearably close and painfully far at the same time. At some point, another doctor came in. He stood near the bed, hands folded, posture careful. He spoke gently, explaining that the child's condition had reached a point where recovery was no longer possible. The body had fought hard, but it was too much. The parent listened, nodding slowly. Tears fell, but there was no loud crying now. Just a deep, quiet grief that seemed to settle into the bones. The doctor explained options, using simple words, giving space for questions. The parent asked none. Everything that mattered was already clear. A decision had to be made. Not about saving the child, because that choice was gone. It was about comfort. About allowing peace instead of pain. The parent felt torn apart by the weight of it, even though there was no real choice at all. The doctor stepped out to give time. The room felt even quieter after he left. The parent rested a head close to the child's arm, breathing slowly, trying to match the rhythm of the machine. Whispered words filled the space, words of love, of pride, gratitude for every moment shared. The child's hand felt warm but weak. The parent held it gently, afraid of squeezing too hard, afraid of letting go. The world outside the hospital room continued on. Cars drove. People slept. None of it felt real. When the medical team returned, they moved slowly, respectfully. Each step was explained. Each action was done with care. The parents stayed close, watching, heartbreaking with every small change. As the machines were adjusted, the room seemed to hold its breath. The parent felt an overwhelming urge to stop time, to freeze this moment forever. Even though it was filled with pain, the child's breathing changed, growing slower, more spaced apart. The parent noticed before anyone else did. Each breath felt like a fragile gift, uncertain and precious. The medical staff stepped back, giving space. Silence filled the room again, deeper than before. The parent leaned close, pressing a forehead gently against the child's. Tears falling freely now. Words became harder to find. The parent whispered the child's name over and over, as if calling them back. There was no response. Only the quiet rhythm of fading breaths. Then, without drama, without warning, the breathing stopped. The machines fell silent. The room seemed to shrink around that single moment. A doctor checked carefully, then looked at the parent with eyes full of sorrow. The words were spoken softly, respectfully. The child was gone. The parent felt something inside break completely. A sound escaped that did not feel human, filled with grief too deep for language. The body shook. Tears fell without control. The world ended in that moment. The medical team stood quietly, giving space, allowing the grief to exist without interruption. No one rushed. No one spoke unless needed. Time passed again, slowly returning. The parent remained beside the bed, touching the child's face, memorizing every detail, knowing this was the last chance. The skin was cooling now, a detail the parent noticed with horror and acceptance at the same time. Eventually, the room had to be prepared. Paperwork waited. Procedures followed. The parent moved through it all like a shadow, responding when spoken to. Barely aware of anything beyond the loss, when the child was finally moved, the bed looked painfully empty. The parent stood alone in the room for a moment, staring at the place where life had been only minutes before. Leaving the hospital felt unreal. The same doors, the same lights, the same sounds, but nothing was the same anymore. Outside, the air felt too fresh, too alive. The world continued as if nothing had happened. The parent stepped into it, carrying a grief that felt impossible to survive. This was the moment the medical case ended inside the hospital. But outside those walls, its impact was only beginning. The days after leaving the hospital, passed in a strange blur. The parent did not remember much of the journey home. Roads looked familiar but felt distant, as if seen through thick glass. Every sound felt louder than it should have been. Every quiet moment felt unbearable. The house door opened the same way it always had, but stepping inside felt wrong. Like entering a place that no longer belonged to them. The house was exactly as it had been left that morning. Shoes near the door. A glass on the table. A school bag resting against the wall. Nothing had changed, yet everything had. The silence inside felt heavier than any noise. It pressed into the chest, making it hard to breathe. The parents stood still for a long moment, unsure where to go or what to do. Then, without warning, the weight of it all came crashing down. The body gave in. Tears came hard and fast, uncontrollable, filling the empty rooms with sounds of grief that had nowhere else to go. The child's room was the hardest to face. The door stayed closed for a while. When it was finally opened, the smell of the room was the same. Familiar, comforting, painful. The bed was still unmade. Clothes lay where they had been dropped. Small objects sat exactly where the child had left them. The parent sat on the edge of the bed, touching the blanket, holding a pillow close, breathing in deeply. Every item felt alive with memory. Each one told a story that now had no ending. Nighttime was the worst. Sleep did not come easily. When it did, it brought dreams that felt too real. Waking up was just as painful, because for a brief second, the parent forgot, and then remembered. Messages and calls began to arrive. Family, friends, people from the community. Words of sympathy filled the phone, but none of them felt right. Nothing anyone said could touch the size of the loss. Still, the parent answered politely, thanked people, did what was expected. Arrangements had to be made. Paperwork completed. Decisions faced that no one should ever have to make. Each task felt mechanical, like the body was moving while the mind stayed somewhere else. The day of farewell arrived quietly. The sky looked ordinary. Too ordinary. People gathered, offering support through gentle touches and quiet words. The parents stood among them, feeling disconnected, watching everything happen from a distance. When it was over, the world did not stop. Cars passed. Shops opened. Children walked by, laughing. That was when the reality truly hit. Life moved forward, even when one life had ended. In the weeks that followed, grief changed shape. Some days it was sharp and overwhelming. Other days it was dull but heavy, like carrying a weight that never came off. Simple tasks became difficult. Getting out of bed felt like a challenge. The parent began to replay everything again. The morning. The school call. The hospital visit. Every decision was questioned. Every moment examined. What if they had gone sooner? What if they had insisted harder? What if something small had been done differently? These questions had no answers, but they refused to leave. Eventually, the hospital contacted the family again. There would be a review. Doctors would look closely at the case to understand what happened. The parent agreed, not out of anger, but out of a need for clarity. A need to know. Meetings followed. Reports were discussed in careful language. Medical terms filled the room, difficult to understand, heavy with meaning. The parent listened closely, asking questions when possible, trying to piece together the story. The explanation was complex. The condition was rare. Symptoms were unclear at first. Progression was fast and unexpected. The doctors spoke honestly about the challenges, about how even experienced professionals can face cases that unfold too quickly. Some things could not be answered fully. Some moments would always remain uncertain. The parent left those meetings with mixed feelings. There was no comfort in knowing, but there was a small sense of understanding. As time passed, the parent realized something important. Staying silent would not bring peace. Hiding the story would not honor the child's life. Slowly, carefully, the parent began to speak. At first, it was with close friends. Then with others who asked. Eventually, the story reached beyond the small circle. People listened. Some shared similar experiences. Some admitted they had ignored symptoms in the past. Conversations began. The parent did not speak with anger. There was no blame, only honesty. Only the hope that awareness could prevent another family from facing the same pain. The child's story became a reminder that small symptoms can matter, that listening carefully is important, that asking questions is not wrong. The parent found small ways to keep the child's memory alive. Lighting a candle on special days, speaking the child's name often, sharing stories that made people smile instead of cry. Grief never fully disappeared. It settled into the background of life, always present, sometimes quiet, sometimes loud. But it no longer controlled every moment. There were days when laughter returned unexpectedly. Days when the sun felt warm again. Those moments came with guilt at first, but slowly the parent learned to accept them. The child would not have wanted endless sadness. Looking back, the parent understood that the medical case did not only shock doctors and nurses, it changed everyone who heard it. It reminded people of how fragile life can be, how quickly things can change. The story spread not as a headline but as a human experience. A family, a child, a loss that mattered. Years later, the parents still remembered every detail of that ordinary morning. The breakfast, the walk, the smile at the gate. Those memories remained clear, untouched by time. And through telling the story, through sharing the pain and the lessons, the parent found a quiet purpose. The child's life, though short, continued to make a difference. This was not just a medical case. It was a life. And it would never be forgotten. Life did not return to normal after the story was shared. Normal no longer existed in the same way. Days continued, weeks passed, seasons changed, but everything carried a quiet difference. The parent woke each morning with the same habit of listening for small sounds that would never come again. The house stayed quiet, yet it no longer felt completely empty. Memories filled the space, settling into corners, resting on shelves. Living in the air at first, the parent tried to keep busy, cleaning, rearranging, fixing small things that did not really need fixing. It felt easier to move the hands than to sit with the thoughts. Some days, this worked. Other days, it did not. People from the community continued to reach out. Some brought food. Some sent messages. Some simply stood nearby without speaking. Over time, fewer people came. That was natural. Life pulled them back to their own routines. The parent understood this. Even though each quiet goodbye felt like another small loss, there were moments when anger appeared unexpectedly. Not loud anger, not shouting, but a quiet frustration that settled deep inside. Anger at how fast everything had happened. Anger at how helpless it all felt. Anger at a world that continued to move forward without stopping. Instead of pushing those feelings away, the parent slowly learned to acknowledge them. Pretending to be fine only made the weight heavier. Accepting that pain was part of love helped make sense of the emotions that came and went without. Warning, the story continued to travel. Someone shared it with someone else. A friend mentioned it to a colleague. A short conversation turned into a longer one. Each time the story was told, it changed slightly, shaped by the listener's experience, but the heart of it remained the same. Some people reached out with their own stories. Stories of missed signs. Stories of sudden illness. Stories of children, parents, siblings. Listening to them was painful, but it was also grounding. It reminded the parent that this pain was not carried alone. The parent began to notice something important. While nothing could change what happened, sharing the experience created awareness. People spoke about being more careful, about asking more questions, about trusting instincts when something felt wrong. This did not bring closure, because closure is a word that rarely fits real loss. But it brought meaning, and meaning mattered. Slowly, routines returned in small ways. Morning walks. Simple meals. Sitting outside in the evening, watching the sky change colors. These moments felt fragile at first, as if enjoying them meant forgetting. Over time, the parent understood that remembering and living could exist together. Certain days remained especially hard. Birthdays, holidays, ordinary days that once held small traditions. On those days, the parent allowed grief to be present without judgment. There was no rush to feel better. There was no timeline to follow. The child's room stayed mostly the same. Nothing was removed quickly. Nothing was rushed. Over time, a few items were carefully stored away, not to erase memory, but to protect it. Some things remained visible, reminders of a life that mattered. The parent found comfort in simple rituals. Lighting a candle, sitting quietly, writing thoughts down when they became too heavy to hold inside. These small actions created space to breathe. Occasionally, the hospital case came up again in conversation. New staff had learned about it. Discussions had happened. The system had reflected. The parent did not seek praise or recognition. Knowing that lessons were taken seriously was enough. There were moments of guilt that appeared without warning. Guilt for laughing. Guilt for resting. Guilt for moments of peace. Each time, the parent reminded themselves gently that love does not require endless suffering. One day, while walking through the neighborhood, the parent saw children playing outside. Their laughter filled the air. For a moment, it hurt deeply. Then, something unexpected happened. The sound also brought a small smile. It reminded the parent of joy, not just loss. Healing did not mean forgetting. It meant carrying the memory differently. As time went on, the story shifted again. It was no longer only about loss. It became about attention, about listening, about care, about how fragile and valuable life truly is. The parent understood that the medical case shocked people because it felt unexpected. But for those who lived through it, it was not just shocking. It was life-altering. There were days when sadness returned without warning. And days when peace arrived quietly. Both were allowed. Both were part of the journey. Years would pass, but the impact would remain. Not as a wound that never healed, but as a mark that shaped how life was seen and lived. Through it all, one truth stayed clear. The child's life, though short, created ripples that reached far beyond what anyone could have imagined. And in those ripples, the parent found a reason to keep moving forward. One day at a time, the years that followed taught the parent something that no one ever teaches directly. Grief does not disappear, but it changes its shape. At first, it is sharp and loud, like a storm that takes over everything. Later, it becomes quieter, settling into daily life in ways that are less obvious, but always present. The parent learned to live alongside that feeling. Mornings still began with a pause, a brief moment when the mind remembered before the body could stop it. The habit of listening for a familiar sound never fully went away. It softened, but it stayed. People often asked how the parent stayed strong. The truth was simple. Strength was not a choice. Getting through each day was not bravery. It was necessity. Life did not offer an alternative path. There were times when the parent felt tired of being seen as strong. Tired of hearing phrases meant to comfort, but that felt empty. Over time, the parent learned to respond kindly while protecting their own heart. The story continued to move quietly from place to place. Sometimes it came up unexpectedly in conversations. Sometimes it returned through messages from people who had never been met before. Each time, the parent felt the familiar ache, but also a sense that the child's life still mattered. Some parents shared that they paid closer attention after hearing the story. Others said they asked more questions at medical visits. A few said they trusted their instincts when something felt off. Hearing this did not erase the pain, but it gave it purpose. The parent understood that awareness does not guarantee safety, but it increases the chance that someone will speak up sooner, listen more carefully, or seek help without delay. That chance mattered. As time passed, the house slowly changed. Not all at once. Not with any clear decision. Small adjustments happened naturally. A piece of furniture moved. A wall was repainted. Life made space for itself again. The child's presence remained in subtle ways. A favorite song still caused a pause. A familiar smell still brought memories flooding back. Certain places were avoided for a long time, until one day they were not. the parent discovered that grief does not follow a straight line. Some days felt light, almost normal. Other days felt heavy without warning. Learning to accept both made life gentler. There were moments of quiet reflection when the parent thought about the medical case itself, about how quickly it unfolded, about how many people had been involved, about how systems work and sometimes fail, even with good intentions. Instead of anger, the parent chose understanding. Medicine is done by humans. Humans are careful, skilled, and dedicated, but they are not perfect. This understanding did not excuse mistakes, but it allowed the parent to breathe without bitterness. Occasionally, the parent was invited to speak in small settings, not as an expert. Just as someone who had lived through something others feared, these moments were handled gently, always with respect for the child's memory. The parent spoke simply, about listening, about asking questions, about not dismissing quiet signs. There was no drama, no blame, only honesty. Listening to others speak afterward reminded the parent that stories connect people in ways facts cannot. One story could open many hearts. There were still nights when sleep came slowly, nights when the mind wandered back to the hospital hallway, the sound of machines, the weight of waiting. Those memories never fully faded, but they became part of the larger story, not the whole of it. The parent learned that it was possible to feel joy again without betrayal. Joy did not replace love. It honored it. On certain days, the parent did something that once felt impossible. They smiled when remembering the child, not through tears, but through warmth. That change felt like progress. Life continued to offer moments of meaning, new friendships, new routines, new ways to give care. None of these replaced what was lost. They existed alongside it, looking back. The parent realized that the medical case shocked people because it revealed how fragile normal life can be. One ordinary day can turn into a story that lasts forever. The child's story became a quiet reminder carried by many. A reminder to listen closely, to care deeply, to never assume that something small cannot matter. The parent never claimed that healing was complete. Some losses are not meant to be healed. They are meant to be carried, and so the story did not end with the hospital, or the farewell, or the review. It continued in conversations, in choices. In awareness, the child's life remained part of the world in ways that could not be measured. And through that, the parent found a steady, gentle way to keep going, one ordinary day at a time.